Explaining Postmodernism, Chapter 4, The Climate of Collectivism, From Postmodern Epistemology to Postmodern Politics. There's a problem with making epistemology fundamental to any explanation of postmodernism. The problem is the postmodernists' politics. If deep skepticism about reason and the consequent subjectivism and relativism were the most important parts of the story of postmodernism, then we would expect to find that postmodernists represent a roughly random distribution of commitments across the political spectrum. If values and politics are primarily a matter of a subjective leap into whatever fits one's preferences, then we should find people making leaps into all sorts of political programs. This is not what we find in the case of postmodernism. Postmodernists are not individuals who have reached relativistic conclusions about epistemology and then found comfort in a wide variety of political persuasions. Postmodernists are monolithically far left-wing in their politics. Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Jean-François Lyotard, and Richard Rorty are all far left. And so are Jacques Lacan, Stanley Fish, Catherine MacKinnon, Andreas Huyssen, and Franklin Tricchia. Of the major names in the postmodernist movement, there is not a single figure who is not left-wing in a serious way. So there is something else going on besides epistemology. Part of that something else is that postmodernists have taken to heart Frederick Jameson's remark that, quote, everything is, in the last analysis, political, unquote. The spirit of Jameson's remark lies behind the persistent postmodernist charge that epistemology is merely a tool of power, that all claims of objectivity and rationality mask oppressive political agendas. It stands to reason, then, that postmodern appeals to subjectivity and irrationality can also be in the service of political ends. But why? Another part of that something else is that leftist thought has dominated political thought among 20th century intellectuals, particularly among academic intellectuals. But even given that fact, the dominance of left thought among postmodernists is still a puzzle, since for most of socialism's intellectual history, it has almost always been defended on the modernist grounds of reason and science. Marx's socialism has been the most widespread form of far-left thought, and, quote, scientific socialism, unquote, was the Marxist self-descriptive phrase. A related puzzle is explaining why postmodernists, particularly among those postmodernists most involved with the practical applications of postmodernist ideas, or with putting postmodernist ideas into actual practice in their classrooms and in faculty meetings, are the most likely to be hostile to dissent and debate, the most likely to engage in ad hominem argument and name-calling, the most likely to enact, quote, politically correct, unquote, authoritarian measures, and the most likely to use anger and rage as argumentative tactics. Whether it is Stanley Fish calling all opponents of affirmative action bigots and lumping them in with the Ku Klux Klan, or whether it is Andrea Dworkin's male bashing in the form of calling all heterosexual males rapists, the rhetoric is very often harsh and bitter. So the puzzling question is, why is it that among the far left, which has traditionally promoted itself as the only true champion of civility, tolerance, and fair play, that we find those habits least practiced and even denounced? Evidence, reason, logic, tolerance, and civility were all integral parts of the modernist package of principles. Socialism in its modern form began in part by accepting that package.